Hi everyone. In this lecture, we'll discuss functions. All right. So a function is a block of code which is executed only when it is called. Like in C++, in many of the program demonstration, you have already may have seen that I have written some int main, right? Like this. Let me zoom it a bit. Yeah. So this is the main function, right? All right. So this All right. So this is also a function. This is a global central function from where the execution begins, right? So main is a reserved keyword in C++. All right. So now coming back to the functions, a function is a block of code which is executed only when it is called. You can pass data, which is important for the processing of the function. The function can process data to produce the meaningful result, right? Like for example, for example here, add is a function, and this function performs the addition of two integers, right? So this data is really important. So it is returning the sum of two numbers, basically, to be more precise, the sum of two integers. This is the syntax for defining a function. This is the return type. Let's compare it to this int return type, which means the return will be in the integer form. This is the function name. Here the function name is add, and these are the parameters like int num1 and int num2. So the parameter syntax is really simple. The data type, the variable name, separated by comma, right? You can give as many parameters as you want. Just like here we have given two parameters, right? So this result in the form of return can be stored in a separate variable. And if there is no return, for example, if I'm just printing something, right, the return type will be void, right? So for example, if it's not returning, it's just printing the sum of two numbers, it will the return type will be void. All right. So apart from function definition, there is function declaration. The function declaration means that we will define the function later, right? Function declaration is a method by which we are declaring to the compiler that we will define the function later, right? So this is the syntax of function declaration: the return type, the function name, and the parameters. Instead of like this is the function definition. This will be the function declaration. If I type it here, or what can we do is we can just write it here. All right, like in the function name will be, for example, add, right? So this is the function declaration. We don't have to give the variable names, just the return types in the parameter section is enough, right? So let's move ahead. The function call is when a main function or one function calls to the other function, right? For example, we are calling the add function. What happens when we call a function? When the function is called, when the function call is made, the control passes to that function. All the statements in that function are executed, means the code in the function is executed, and after the execution, the control returns back to the calling function. I guess you are confused, right? If you're confused, this slide should clear your doubts. This is the main function, for example. Now this is the function, and when this function is mentioned, the name of this function is mentioned, the control will pass to this function, the function func, right? The code inside the function will be executed. Since the return type is void, it will not return anything. That's why nothing in the value, nothing is stored, because it's not returning anything, right? After this function, after this line or any return type, the control will pass to this statement, and the rest rest of the code is executed. Now there are two ways by which the control from this function, right, the control from this function which will pass to this function. The first method is end of function, efficiency. For example, the control reaches here. If the control reaches here, obviously it will return. Number two, if there is any return type, or even if there is void, the return statement is mentioned. If there is void, then it will just, this is enough. If there is some return type, then return obviously the variable whatever it is. So in case of these two conditions, the control will be returned to this function, right? So that's how the function call mechanism, this is the function call mechanism, right? Let's see with the help of an example, right? So this is our function declaration, right? This is the function declaration, right? This is the int add, right? We mentioned here, this is the function declaration, and this is the int main. Function declaration is made because we are declaring that we will define the function later, just like here we are defining the function after the int main. If we don't declare the function, the compiler won't know that the function definition exists after this, right? So that's why the function declaration is important. Obviously function declaration is a part of good programming practice. So this is a function declaration. All right, now let's execute this line of code. Once we execute this line of code, num1 is 1 and num2 is 3. Now the add function is made, in which the parameters are number 1 and number 2. Now the control will go to this function. Now in this function there are two parameters, number 1 and number 2, and it's basically a method of call by value. We will see call by value and call by reference, both the two methods later, but let's forget those things. The two variables are number 1 and number 2. Now the number 1 is 1 and now 2 is 3, and it's returning the sum of those numbers. Whatever it is returning, it will be stored, or that thing will be stored here in the number 3. So the num3 will be 4, and that number 3 is printed here, right? So that's how the function call is made. So that's how the things are done. Now let's see the scope. If a function is declared inside of another function, it's known as the local function. If a function is declared outside of any function, the function that is declared outside of any function, that is known as a global function. For example, that int main is a kind of global function, you can say that, right? Types of the function call. There are two types of function call, as we mentioned earlier. This is called call by value, and it is called call by reference. Call by value is, for example, here this is example of call by value, right? We are passing the variable as it is. Basically we are passing the values, right, not the variables. We are passing the values 1 and 2, right? Even if instead of num1, if we pass 1 comma 2, that would be called by value, because we are passing a value. But in call by reference, what we do is we pass the address of the variable. Now for example, let's take this line of code, right? And here it's int num3 is equal to address of number 1 and address of number 2. So in true sense, this is the passing of variables. not the values, because we are passing the memory location of the variable. So for example, now the control will pass to this function. Now the control will pass to this function. Obviously, the parameters will be there accordingly. We will not see obviously all the things here, because it can make the thing complicated, right? So now let's say these are the things here. Now in this function, now this function tampers with the variable. That tampering will cause the effect in these two variables, right? And obviously, if the tampering causes the variables, the effect, if the effect will be caused in the main processing. Here, if I say num1 is equal to 0 and num2 is equal to 0, these two numbers will not be modified. For example, here I say that num1 is equal to 0 and num2 is equal to 0, right? And return 0. Obviously, the num3 will be impacted, but these two num1 and num2 will not be impacted, because we are sending values in call by value, and in call by reference we are passing the variables, right? So let's remember it. In call by value we are passing the values. In call by value, in call by reference, we are passing the address, or you can see memory location. We are passing the reference, right? A reference of variables. We are passing the values of variables, right? So any tampering will be on the values, and that values will be stored in a separate variable. So basically it's a copy kind of thing. In reference we are actually tampering with the actual variable, right? So in call by reference we have to take a special care of not manipulating the variables if we don't want to. All right, so these are there is a differential table between the call by value and the call by reference. In call by reference we passes the value of the actual parameter, right? We passes the value. In call by reference we pass the address of the actual parameter. Actual and formal parameters refer to the different memory location, obviously, because we are passing the value that is stored in the separate variable. But in call by reference, the actual and formal parameter refer to formal parameters refer to the same memory location. So basically it is the same variable. Effectively, all the operations that are performed by the function on the parameters are basically on a different variable altogether. Obviously, all the operations that are performed by the functionality are basically on the same variable. I don't know who wrote this, right? It's the original variable is not modified, obviously, because two separate variables are there. But in call by reference, the original variable is modified. All right. So I guess you have understood it. Let's write a program. We will do a separate demonstration for call by reference once we study pointers. All right. So for example, there is a function add. Let's say we are going to add function declaration. Now let's see. Now let's not take, but let's see the num1 is equal to 12 and the num2 is equal to 13, right? Let's add it. Let's add num1 and num2, and the result will be stored in the variable res, right? Now the result will be Now let's define the function add. We have declared it, now it's time to define it. Right, let's execute it. The result is 25. 12 plus 13 is 25. So what's happening here? The happening is number 1 is equal to 12 and number 2 is equal to 13. We are passing these two numbers. Here the number 1 is being passed as a value. I can also write as 12, right? I can also pass it as 13. Once these two numbers are being passed, it will do some operations, whatever the function is doing. If it's subtracting, it will subtract, or whatever the function wants to do, right? So this is how. And after addition, the result is stored in the variable res, and the res is printed. That's how the processing is done. Let's do one thing. Instead of int, now let's do void. Now let's write another function. Right, let's delete it. Right, it will not return anything here. Since it will not return anything, so nothing will be stored in the variable res. Since there is no storing of res, there is no point in writing cout. So now it will not return anything, it will just print here. All right, let's execute it. See, the sum is a plus b, which is 25. So we can also do that also. So the control is passed to this function. It executed everything, right? And after that, it just returned. Now here the control ended when the function ended. Now we can also end the code here without executing anything, because the return statement is there. You will see that this statement is not executed. Let's see, the statement is not executed because it encountered the return keyword, and after returning, the control is returned back to this line. So that's how we can control the program flow. We can control the controls. We can control this, right? We can control the program flow. All right, so I guess you have understood it. If you have any doubts, then you can ask, right? We'll see this is the example of call by value, because we are passing a value here, right? Call by reference we'll study after after we have studied pointers, right? Because obviously the pointers are involved whenever the references are involved, right? So that's it for today. If you have any doubts, you can ask us, right? This is an important concept and you should practice as much as you can. So that's it for today, and we'll meet in the next lecture. Thanks.